I don't want to say that we don't care about what our readers expect or viewers expect, but we've set the expectation with them that this is what we do. We've built a community of like-minded people where all of us are very curious about very few things, which often links to the market. And in the end, what comes out is something that benefits both of us. Us, as we end up learning something new, and them also, they end up consuming slightly more informative content besides the brain rot that's already flooding social media.
Yeah, but you touched a very interesting point, which is for Zerodha, for example, you guys are not depending on your viewership to get more business. For a lot of new companies, they build distribution around content and then the business follows. So once you start chasing outcomes, your result gets diluted, I feel, at a very sort of philosophical level. But I feel there is a parallel there when it comes to investing as well, and what I've done, for example, as a research analyst. Cool. So, welcome to another podcast with Paterson. Today, we're here with Kashish. You've seen him in an earlier episode of ours. We'll put the link up here. He's someone who works with Zerodha closely in the research and content team. So, we're here to talk about our research process. Because I think that is central to both our organizations, whether it is at Paterson, what we do, whether it is at Zerodha, what these guys do. We're all being in the markets researching stocks, but with different dimensions. And research, I think, is one of those very hot topics right now in finance. Interestingly, I'll tell you, we were looking for a research analyst. And within 24 hours, we've got some 300 applications as soon as through one LinkedIn post. But I think the common problem also is that people want to do research, but they don't really know what the job of a research analyst is. And depending on where you're working, the role of a research analyst is very different. So what we'll probably start with is just explaining how your research is different from mine, and then dwell into how our practices are different, so that we're able to highlight how your process is different, how my process is different, etc. So let's just start with, what do you do?
Yeah, so I really just love the parallel that we're trying to draw here, because in the end, even though the outcome of what we do is different, you make investing decisions, I push out a newsletter every day. At the core of it, there's still a lot of similarities, because in the end, both of us work in finance and both of us have our research processes. But at the same time, when we're drawing parallel, there are differences as well. So just understanding that nuance, maybe just even talking about it, help both of us also understand a bit more as to how we do what we do, and at the same time maybe help the audience as well to understand. With that said, what I do is, at the very, very core of it, in very few words, just be naturally curious about things that really fascinate me in the business world, and then do my best to learn as much as possible about it, and then condense it and push it out in maybe a newsletter or a YouTube video. But at the core of it, it is just me being very curious about a thing that really fascinated me, which more often than not is related to the world of business and eventually finance and stocks.
But in that process, what you are curious about will be probably materially different from what your audience may be curious about. How do you strike a balance between the two?
So I think there we've set the expectation with our audience, because again, fortunately, we as Zerodha are privileged enough to be in a position where we can work on something without an end in mind. There are firms, like we're bootstrapped, right? And we're extremely profitable. So we don't have an end in mind where at the end of every content piece that we put out, we have to get as many views, as many subscribers. Since we don't have that expectation, this allows us to be very creative and really just wing it with whatever we want to do. With that privilege, I don't want to say that we don't care about what our readers expect or viewers expect, but we've set the expectation with them that this is what we do, and this is what makes us curious. And by doing that consistently, we've garnered a community, a viewership, whatever you want to call it, where the expectation is same. And more often than not, it's not that जो हम research करते हैं वही लोग देखते हैं. There's obviously a two-way feedback where they also give us suggestions. And oftentimes, those are things that even we end up researching on, because in the end, we've built a community of like-minded people where all of us are very curious about very few things, which often links to the markets. So it's not that कि हमें कैसे पता लगता है, like how do we know what they like?
Yeah.
It's just that we've set the expectation with our audience where we feed them something, they feed us something, and in the end, what comes out is something that benefits both of us. Us as we end up learning something new, and them also, they end up consuming slightly more informative content besides the brain rot that's already flooding social media.
Yeah, but you touched a very interesting point, which is for Zerodha, for example, you guys are not depending on your viewership to get more business. This is not your distribution by any way. For a lot of new companies, they build distribution around content and then the business follows. So you're able to take a more objective view in terms of what you guys are doing. And that might lead to better results rather than having a latakti talwar on you all times कि भाई मुझे views चाहिए, I need engagement, I need XYZ. So once you start chasing outcomes, your result gets diluted, I feel, at a very sort of philosophical level. But I feel there is a parallel there when it comes to investing as well. And what I've done, for example, as a research analyst. So just maybe taking a step back, I've been a research analyst with Daiwa Asset Management for 2 years, where we've managed about 70,000 crores worth of funds. And now with Paterson, we have a PMS here where we are doing about 150 crores in AUM, just started last year. So here also primary role is to pick stocks with the objective of making money. But the moment a fund manager or a research analyst is under pressure that I have to deliver X amount of return this year, or that I have to keep this customer happy in the next 3 months, the moment you attach your outcome with either a time duration or with a number which is returns, you start becoming very subjective. Your emotional biases come in, you're not objective any longer, your research goes for a toss, you have a certain outcome in your mind which you start to mimic in your process. So you already decided that mujhe kharidna hai, and then you find ways of justifying it. So that's something that we also try to do, which is stay clear of external pressure, focus on quality, focus on making money, of course, but don't put a number to it that yaar 10% करना है, 15% कैगर तो दिखाना ही है. So all that aside, so I think that's a great point you brought up in terms of.
And honestly, I think in both these scenarios, it's the person sticking to the process is more important than the actual outcome being achieved. Even though we know for a fact if we stick to the process long enough, the outcome will happen. I mean, as much as I'd like to say ki we don't want to look at views, we know ki okay, this also is, even though it's not a metric we want to try to look at, but in the end, who wouldn't want to get in front of more people? That's one.
Sure.
And even though we never really optimized for it, we're fortunate enough that today, like just last week, we crossed 200K subs, right? So it's not that it doesn't matter to us,
Yeah.
but it's just that the metric itself is not the goal. Because when that happens, things really go haywire. And sticking to the process really does bring sanity into the team and the way we do things. And I guess that very well parallels with how a good research analyst in a buy-side firm or a sell-side firm, or rather anywhere should approach it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally agree. Because I think even for us, I mean, I'll be very disappointed if we do 0% returns or underperform the markets for a long time. So we are also sort of, if there is some stock which goes 15% down, 20% down, 25% down, every 5%, we've got a risk management practice where the fund manager is held on the line. We are sort of questioning him and saying that, boss, are you aware of what is happening? Are you sure of what you're doing, etc.? So on the outside, we're like, whatever, but there is a process. It's about, I think, sticking by a process. So you form like a framework. And as long as you're sticking within the bounds of that framework and you're being focused on quality, I think the outcome just follows. So yeah, I mean, our objectives are different again, right? I think your objective is to, okay, so what is your objective? Let's hear it from you. I don't want to assume your objective. When you're researching something, other than feeding your personal curiosity, what is the objectives?
I think the only objective we have is that we want to do justice to that topic that we have chosen to a point where we are, let's say, even just a little bit better than what's out there for our viewers. That's the only objective that we have. Fortunately for us, current standards of financial journalism are not too high. So crossing them isn't really that big a deal.
Yeah.
If we're really intellectually honest with what we are doing, how we are doing it, it's not really difficult to do that. And that's the only objective I think we have. If we've picked up anything, anything for that, like let's say just talking about the PCB industry, how the printed circuit boards work, just doing enough justice to understanding the value chain at its core. For that, we'll have to read a lot, talk to experts, do whatever you can, but doing enough justice where the reader did take away four, five, six things which they didn't know. I think that's a job well done on our part, and that is a good day for us. So, answering what do we optimize for? I think it's that part, and unfortunately, that can't be quantified, which is why a lot of the firms which are, let's say, purely driven by end objectives, they'll never pursue it. Again, this leaves us in a moment of privilege. We are able
But
to
sorry, you
afford that.
can quantify it, right? One is growth in audience and how much quality audience you have, or how engaging you are. I mean, how much engaging they are with your content.
But these are just proxies to the outcome, not the actual outcome. So we can say that if we are reaching more people and it's growing, we are doing a good job. But is that really the exact way how we want to associate our success as? I'm not too sure about it. Is there let me give you an example. Do I see myself being stuck at 200k subs, having the same amount of views, but still doing a really good job? That's totally possible. So, coming back to the point, is growth good? Yes. But is growth the only way to know I am good at what I do? Not really sure. Which is why which is why even internally we've never really benchmarked ourselves to anything. We do celebrate milestones though. ऐसा नहीं है we don't. We're having our 200k dinner party tomorrow. I'm very excited about it. The whole team is. But again, when it purely comes from a philosophical point, ki, what are we trying to optimize for? Having that one-to-one relation to the metrics like growth in subscribers, growth in views, we're not too comfortable making that because we know it's very noisy too. And once we start getting too attached to it, we risk derailing from the process that we have, something that we are very proud of and we want to stick to.
Got it. Yeah. Fair. So I think in both our cases, whatever the objectives may be in terms of end goal, ours is, for example, just making money for our clients. I think there is a certain process that is, at least the framework of it will be similar, where number one, there is a layer of discovery. What are you going to write about? What am I going to study or research as my starting point? Second is you will probably finalize a topic. I'll maybe shortlist a few stocks. Then probably there'll be some initial discovery or dipping your feet into the water. Similarly, we'll do the same. Then maybe scrapping it or going back or digging down deeper. So that's where the meat comes in. And finally, then your output. So if we have these five, six sort of stepping blocks, what I'd really like to do is touch upon each of them and figure out what you do and what I do in that entire 6 parts. So let's start with discovery. The world is open when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to investing. We've got more than 4,000 stocks. You'll also obviously write about something relevant to those 4,000 plus stocks. What is the start point?
Why don't we start this with you? You start and then I'll say how do we do things?
Okay, so I think for us, start points are multiple. One is we've got a team of research analysts. So the way the entire organization is structured when the fund management comes in is that there are research analysts at the base layer. They are given responsibility to track certain sectors. So 2-3 sectors for each analyst. Then we've got fund managers after that. We've got 3 fund managers, depending on number of funds, etc., etc. So we've got a team of 3 fund managers. On top of that, then there is an investment committee, which governs the entire process and which keeps a check on the fund manager's performance. And if something is off, we obviously bring it to light, we iterate our process, improve it, etc., etc. A lot of the ideation for a fund manager will come from the research analyst tracking a particular sector. So if I, as a research analyst, am given responsibility for, I'll probably go back to Daiwa for this because that's when I was a research analyst. I was tracking TMT, which is telecom, media, technology, internet, business services, fertilizers and agri-chemicals, all commodities basically. Then metals also and paints and everything. Anything that is a commodity and is cyclical, I would track. So in that process, I think it depends on the sector. So टेक्नोलॉजी में तो गिने चुने 15-20 स्टॉक है, उसी में खेलना है. Telecom is a very broad based call. I am taking a macro call that idea is not going anywhere. Bharti Airtel is doing extremely well. Jio was not listed at that time, so I am long Bharti, for example. Chemicals was a space where there was a lot of discovery to happen. So I think that was a space where I would, so the way I had done it was, I subdivided the entire chemical sector into parts, looking at the periodic table. कि sodium chain में कौन-कौन है, which is basically all your sodium players, that entire chain. Then chlorine, fluorine, bromine. So do it chemical wise, figure out where that chemical is used, how big is the market, is India relevant, China के क्या dynamics है. So I think just 3 months of deep diving into understanding the various chemical chains, going back to my chemistry lessons, taking help from chemistry professors at the end of it कि भाई समझा दो ये क्या है, and then finally coming to what is the most favorable spot in the chemical chain, not only from a demand perspective but also from a pricing, China, multiple angles. So you take a very holistic view and find the most favorable spot, and then you finally come to company selection. So that's how I used to work it out, because it highly depends on which industry you're tracking. Sometimes it's straightforward, sometimes it's a very macro call, sometimes it's dependent on dissecting, dividing, cutting, and then finally figuring out. So discovery process is different depending on industry. As a fund manager, it may differ a little, where fund managers have a good network as well, for example. So मैंने देखा यार, I'm friends with the Canara Robeco mutual fund manager, for example. He tells me, boss, I'm buying this, it looks good, देख लेना. He wants a second opinion maybe, but maybe I'm getting an idea from there, and I tell my chemicals analyst then कि boss, just look at it. So it can come either from internal or external. So that's the discovery process in a nutshell for us.
Okay. So, ठीक है. I mean, for us, the process, it's slightly different, because again, यहाँ पे you're trying to discover stock opportunities.
Yeah.
What we are trying to discover are different ideas we want to talk about. More often than not, they are linked to the stocks and markets, but कई बार नहीं भी होता. But in the end, they are linked to the economy, right? Which is why the playground that we have, I guess, is much larger compared to how you guys approach it. So, just to give you an example, if you were talking about, let's say, AI as a theme, maybe AI as a theme has very limited place in Indian context, right? But for me, who's a content guy, who wants to just write content, right? I can talk about any obscure place of AI, whichever gets my interest, which tells me that, okay, I have a much larger playground to play with, which also means कि I can experiment a lot.
Yeah.
Now coming to discovery, हमारी discovery cycle is also very, I won't say as structured as yours. It's actually much more chaotic, which helps us because it is through pure serendipity that we end up finding about a lot of ideas that we wouldn't have otherwise had we stuck to a structure. What do I mean by that? We are four of us who write. First of all, even though it's just the four of us who write, ideas come from everyone in the company, because everyone in the company is in the end a person who's consuming content. If they find anything interesting, they do share it with us because they know we write about things.
Yeah.
So there's not a single day in our company where somebody's not read something and not shared with us. And we just start a thread where every day, and it could be anything. It could be about AI, it could be about capital markets, it could be about, because we also interact with folks at Rain Matter.
So it could also be about regulation, for example.
Exactly,
it could be about
exactly.
private investments, VC investments.
Exactly. So the thing is, being a broker, we have to be on top of all the regulations that happen in the industry.
Yeah.
Right? So we have a set of people who keep a very close track of it. And every now and then, there's something that happens. They make sure they're the first one to ping it on the group for everyone's knowledge.
Yeah.
And in that group, everybody's there. All the VPs, AVPs, everyone's there. वहाँ पे they share this purely from a perspective where everyone in the industry should know what's happening. Everyone in our company should know what's happening in the industry with their viewpoint on it. So that alone gives us a lot of ideas, because the person who's working in compliance comes from a compliance perspective where he's talking about all regulations.
Yeah.
The person who's working in rain matter, who's been looking at, let's say, hydrogen investments for the past 2-3 weeks and has talked to 5 different companies, has very different context of what he's researching on, and then he'll put something that he thinks is interesting. So now I, as a guy who's writing research on, half of my work is done because now I'm surrounded by all these smart people who are really passionate about the things that they're into, at the same time, which are very diverse as well. So I already have on my platter all of these different ideas. Do I pick all of them? Not at all. But do I at least sparse through all of them? Absolutely yes. So that alone gives us a lot of ideas. Then हम अपनी भी discovery खुद करते हैं. How that happens is us just being very indiscriminate when it comes to reading or just consuming content. It could be through blogs, through podcasts, through videos.
So just doom scrolling is your
Yeah. But rather than doom scrolling on Instagram, it's usually curated Twitter
better,
feeds
sure,
or Substacks or Value Picker. Or
so you'll define your universe depending on what you like reading, what you find comfortable absorbing, what you find value additive. And you'll scroll through or browse through that regularly and keep adding to that engine as well.
And hope that we come across something worth reading and sharing. And again, the thing is ki, in the end, we all have our biases. Even though, let's say, the world is our playground, we still end up talking about a very few things. Like I personally am very passionate about green energy. Anything energy, anything generation, transmission, distribution, hydrogen, BESS, कुछ भी हो रहा हो, I just, तो by default अगर मैंने Reuters खोला है and I'm looking at different stories, it's usually those stories that I find very interesting to share. And that's the same case with my colleague who apparently loves reading about quick commerce. He's a lot into consumer brands. So कुछ भी consumer brand में हो रहा है, this is a niche that he's built for himself. And then there's another guy who's like a gung-ho guy on everything China. China में कुछ भी हो रहा था उसको पता होता है. And he'll end up sharing a lot of macro geopolitical stories. So here,
so you all have kind of divided amongst like sectors amongst yourselves, but without knowing.
Without knowing, exactly. So it's very similar to how you guys do it. There's a structure, we just do it. But that doesn't mean that that's the only thing we stick to. We try to barge into each other's territory because in the end we want to be as immersed in all of these things. But at the same time, we have picked up a few things that we like. So discovery-wise, we're being very indiscriminate when it comes to us finding pieces of content or anything to learn, talk about. At the same time, have an army of extremely smart people in the industry working for Zerodha who are very passionate about the things that they do, and they too keep sharing all of these things. And see, the thing is, even though let's say there's somebody who's working in compliance in the company, he might, in his personal capacity, love reading about, I don't know, maybe the glass industry. So he'll share a piece on glass industry. Who knows? We'll find very interesting because it's not that we are core research analysts जिसको हर एक company के बारे में पता है. Glass industry is very new to us. We're like, okay, fuck it. That will be a place where we'll, let's say, start learning about the HLE glass coat ka whole business model and all of that, right? Borosil ka business model, all of that. So that becomes a gateway point. To summarize, it is just us being very indiscriminate in everything that we read, because again, what we're chasing is not a stock idea, but any idea. So that allows us a lot more flexibility.
Got it. I think I want to add a couple of points to my discovery process after hearing yours out. One is, so on the buy side, when you are a fund manager or you're generally managing funds or portfolios, you've got access to a lot of brokers who provide you with free research, which comes as a part of their execution services, which is called the sell side. So the sell side constantly is feeding you ideas as well. So I think you end up with knowing that ये broker का, इस analyst का मुझे thinking अच्छा लगता है. I like his picks. When he tells me something, I know I have to look at it. I have to ignore these set of analysts. I have to whatever. So I think a lot of those intelligent conversations happen not just amongst fund managers and research analysts here, but also with a sell side dimension. So we're constantly getting fed with ideas from there as well, which you may choose to ignore or whatever. That comes with experience, who to ignore, who to delve into deeper and stuff like that. And I think a large part of a buy-side research analyst day is spent just reading and consuming. So, I mean, I remember being a research analyst and reading for like 6 to 8 hours every single day at work, outside work. and you're not being as indiscriminate about reading. At the end of it, it has to be investable, but you do find your areas of interest and you learn to draw a lot of parallels which do not come through reading with an objective. So I'll give you an example. There was a time when Boeing and Airbus, for example, were doing a lot of order intake, record high order intake and sales
This
happening.
is post COVID.
um, pre
Okay.
pre-COVID. Then went into figuring out that इनका design cycle 3 साल का होता है, फिर execution cycle 10 साल का होता है, then that process repeats. So the aerospace cycle is typically that. How is it relevant to me? Finally figured that Cyient नाम की IT company है which does a lot of work for Bombardier, Boeing, Airbus, etc. And their revenue stream, because they're doing a lot of design work from India and supporting a lot of the R&D, follows the cycle where their R&D tops, and when execution comes, their revenue dries up. So when people think aerospace industry is doing well globally, Cyient will not do well because they are in execution phase and they're busy minting money and not giving any revenue to these guys. Their revenue picks up much later. So this is a part of not studying Cyient. It came from studying or reading about Boeing and generally Airbus K trends, which happens a lot with, for example, natural calamities sometimes. I remember picking up aluminium because there was a flood in South America which destroyed one of the largest aluminium plants globally. And then suddenly prices shot up. So you had a play in Hindalco at that time. So drawing these parallels does not really come out of saying कि आज मैं metals पढ़ूंगा, आज मैं JSW का balance sheet खोलूंगा. None of that. It's just about reading a lot of news and being able to make these connections with making money. To the extent that even a calamity appears like an opportunity to you, which is quite poorly capitalistic, inhumanly capitalistic, but that's your job. And at the end of it, you're feeding your curiosity, you're finding ways to sort of connect things, and you start to see the world in a very different way in terms of just being able to connect random things into stock ideas or buying opportunities.
Honestly, this reminds me, I was talking to another investor who was talking about him reading about memory businesses in the US. And memory businesses की cycle was usually very closely tied to iPhone launches because हर बार नया iPhone launch होता था and most of the memory output used to go into these phones. And because again, from a digital hardware perspective, phone sales की बहुत close one-to-one correlation था memory businesses से. But again, he ends up he got reminded he used to read an AI guy who very vehemently was talking about how memory businesses would shot up like crazy should AI become a reality. And that's exactly what happened in the US for the past decade. जो memory businesses stagnant रहे थे, after 2020, I don't remember the name of the stock, that business shot up like crazy because again, अब इन सभी data centers में HVAC का पूरा system, memory businesses, इन सब का बहुत ज़्यादा craze आया. Was he reading on AI? No.
Yeah.
Was he even thinking about investing? No. But he suddenly remembered, भाई मैंने एक memory businesses के बारे में पढ़ा था.
Yeah.
And so I think I very well closely relate to what you said.
So discovery is great. I think we've aligned on a lot of things here. But how about finalizing what you're picking up next? Because that will again differ, or we can draw parallels. I don't know. But after you've dwelled into several topics or touch based on several ones, what do you do next in terms of picking a direction?
So yeah, इसमें usually what happens is us thinking again from this time from a viewer's point of view, because we don't want to talk about something so niche that nobody would be interested in. And at the same time, we also want to do justice कि भाई हमें ये interesting लग रहा है. So वहाँ पे it's very subjective. And here the cycle is much faster compared to how I think asset management works, because you don't end up picking 10 ideas a day. In our nature of our business, nature of how we do things, हर रोज हमें 2 ideas pick करनी है.
So yours is a volume game.
Exactly.
I may not even care about volume because I may choose to sit on the same portfolio for one entire year.
Yeah.
If I'm happy with how it's going and not really hunt for ideas, or I can play with weights.
So in our case, this is a volume game. which also means we have a higher margin of error. Even if we end up picking a story that shouldn't have been picked, or we just did a bad judgment, we won't be hurt as much because it will be just one of the many stories that we cover throughout the
Yeah.
week or throughout the month, right? That's definitely not the case with you, because if you end up picking something,
Yeah.
you'll dedicate a lot of resources researching on it, and if it ends up in portfolios, there's money
Yeah.
at stake.
Yeah.
So in that case, I guess हमारे पास ज़्यादा leeway है, and how we end up picking, again, it's very subjective, and more often than not, it's also in the vibes कि बहुत time हो गया हमने इस industry के बारे में कुछ बात नहीं की, let's talk about it. But more importantly, we don't want to be repetitive as well, because we have context of all the stories that we have written, right? We are at I don't know, we've published, I don't even remember कितने episodes हो गए, but we've written more than
That shows how you're not tracking these metrics altogether.
Yeah,
Which is great.
so we've easily covered 300 400 stories, and these 300 400 are not the same topics. Matlab, some repetition is there,
Yeah.
but again a newer angle every time. So again, the idea is कि हम repeat ना करें what we've already said, but also have something new. Honestly, there's nothing more to add here, क्योंकि हम बहुत vibes पे जाते हैं. What we feel like writing that day. That's all.
But how about this? When you've grown from say 10K subscribers to 200K, you'll have a lot of new audience. If you start saying that I've already written about this and say that, okay, I can start at level 2 because I've already so a lot of what you write depends on your learning curve as well. So if you go back to what you'd written 1 year back, you'll feel like यार कितना preliminary था, ये तो deep dive किया ही नहीं मैंने.
Yeah.
And now you feel like you're adding value, for example, to yourself, but it may be different for your reader because your new readers are coming with the same level of knowledge as your earlier readers, but your level has suddenly changed. How do you maintain that balance there?
There's no way you can do that, and we've internalized this. We've internalized this because every reader, every individual person will have their own learning curve, and for us as writers, theirs too. The only way a good view will happen is when both of them are at the same point, irrespective of how old or new that viewer is to our channel. If they're on the same wavelength as we are with respect to that topic, they'll vibe with us, they'll appreciate what we've done, and it'll be just a good experience for both them and for us, because we think we did a good job and उनको भी कुछ सीखने को मिला.
Fair.
Hi, more often than not ऐसा होगा कि they're at a different wavelength, irrespective of they're a new viewer or a old viewer, and we just won't serve, we won't be able to serve them, and we are okay with that.
But I guess it will also come back in feedback which you'll take from, right?
But there's no way to solve for it. That's the problem.
नहीं, I mean, अगर comments में आ गया कि यार you guys are too technical, and you start getting qualitatively those kind of comments, then you know that boss, I need to tone it down, or XYZ needs to tone it down. It's you'll obviously take that feedback and iterate.
We always do that. But see, again, it's just a balance that I don't know we've cracked it so far. But just say every time I do a banking story, because I love tracking lending businesses, every time I do a banking story, I can't go to the basics explaining what NIMs are or what NPAs
Of course,
are.
yeah.
Matlab, maybe in the first story I dedicated 150 200 words explaining what NPA is, but इस बार मैं बस बोलूँगा bad loan or the money that might not be paid back.
Yeah.
Does that do justice to what NPAs are? Maybe, maybe not. But is this what's needed for the story right now? Yes. So that is a balance that I'll just have to, and this discussion happens every 2-3 months, and हर 2-3 महीने बाद we don't have an answer to this, so we just agree to the fact
Continue
that,
doing what you're doing, and do it better.
Yeah.
That's all.
That I guess that's the only way we can solve.
Yeah.
We can't solve for it. We just have to accept the fact that,
Because it's also a paradox, so it'll keep putting you within that entire circle and whatever. So sure, I get it.
we don't. How do you finalize on an idea?
Wow. So see, end objective is simple: to make money, right? So basically, we want to figure out whether we can sustainably make money or not, because when we invest, we are usually investing for the long term, and by that I mean we're usually investing for 3 to 5 years at least. So we have certain checks in place where, for example, corporate governance is at the top of it. So I want to know that ownership is there from promoters. It is not pledged. That promoter is good in terms of corporate governance. No shady practices, no ethical issues. Very ethically sound as promoters. Working for shareholders, not for themselves. Even if they are a majority shareholder, there are other shareholders. So working for collectively shareholders, um, not siphoning money off, not a lot of private businesses with interdealings, stuff like that. So several checks within corporate governance which we want to be absolutely clear of, which come for a new company through research. But if you've been in the markets long enough, it is enough for me to hear from somebody कि यार ये थोड़ा इफी है, तो मैं नहीं देखूंगा वो. So at Paterson, or it was at Daiwa, which was a Japanese company, they're very strict on stuff like this. We eliminate right there. Anything that will make us lose our sleep or put our money at risk when it comes to governance issues, cut. Even if I'm losing a money making opportunity, I'm okay because the risk is not worth it. So certain groups also we avoid altogether. We don't want to name it, but I think everybody gets the hint. And a lot of our customers are on the same page when it comes to this. That boss, don't invest in this group, and I'm like, we are pretty much aligned there. So I think number one, corporate governance. Number two, what we want to see is that the industry is doing well. Because you don't want to back the best player and the most capable, but in a declining industry. There is no point doing that. So industry tailwinds are an absolute necessity. The third thing we'll probably look at is come down to the company level, where we want to ensure from a financial health standpoint, there are certain checks that are met. One is, I don't want to look at, fixate too much on historical financials, कि वो स्क्रीनर पे ये डालो पैरामीटर्स और हिस्ट्री देखो और फिर जज करो. दैट इज नॉट हाउ वी ऑपरेट. वी आर इन्वेस्टिंग फॉर द फ्यूचर. वी वांट टू जज द फ्यूचर. So our primary objectives will be focused on very back of the envelope calculations in the beginning. कि revenue growth say double digits होना ही चाहिए. I should see margin expansion. I should see potential for valuation re-rating. Because at the end of it, I think our alignment for fund managers and research analysts, the common theme is that money making we want to do from a combination of two factors: earnings growth and valuation re-rating. अगर दोनों में से एक भी मिसिंग है तो वेटेज उस हिसाब से डिसाइड होगा. लार्ज कैप्स में यूजुअली लैटर का ज्यादा स्कोप नहीं रहता, बट वी फिगर दैट. बट फॉर मिड एंड स्मॉल कैप्स फॉर एग्जांपल, दीज टू आर एन एब्सोल्यूट नेसेसिटी. So we'll do basic back of the envelope calculations in terms of figuring out कि यार मेरे को यहाँ से 30% अर्निंग्स ग्रोथ दिख रहा है, और अगर 30% डिलीवर करेगा, हिस्टोरिकली 10% डिलीवर किया है, तो इसका री रेटिंग होना चाहिए. 15 टाइम पे ट्रेड नहीं होना चाहिए, 25 टाइम पे ट्रेड होना चाहिए. मल्टीप्लाई करो, देख लो कितना वैल्यू आता है. यार भाव से अभी 40% ऊपर है, I'll look at it. So that very basic back of the, and I can go wrong on it, I'll do my detailed financial modeling later, but back of the envelope calculation absolutely necessary. So we'll dwell into the idea a little bit, figure these things out. If these are check marks for us, then we go ahead finalizing the idea in terms of abhi depth में जाना है. या नहीं तो direction ही नहीं लूँगा मैं. I will scrap it right there. If the company is not great on, say for example, sorry, one more on the financial part, revenue growth should be there, margin expansion should be there. Then I very closely will look at balance sheet. I want to see prudent capital allocation. I want to see that even if I'm projecting 50% growth, for example, I want to go back and see, can they afford 50% growth? Where will the money come from? Do they have cash? Will they take debt? Will they dilute equity? What will they do? Where will this basic sense I want to do? Additionally, most importantly, I think, and last one on the financials is that I want to make sure the cash flows are coming in. Everything may look very pretty from the profit and loss standpoint, where margins are 45%, crazy operating margins, etc. लेकिन यार अगर ऑपरेटिंग कैश फ्लो नहीं है तो मुझे नहीं देखना है. और अगर नहीं है इन द पास्ट बिकॉज ऑफ वट एवर रीजन, बिकॉज समटाइम्स यू आर एक्सपैंडिंग वेरी हेविली एंड अ कंपनी फॉर एग्जाम्पल विच इज इन अ वेरी the product takes 2 years to build, for example, like look at products like compressors, generators, turbines, stuff like that. They take 2 years, 3 years to build. They have to buy the inventory first. As soon as they buy the inventory, working capital gets screwed up, and in a growth phase, their operating cash flow won't be made. So I'll take these factors into consideration. So learning the business and contextualizing is obviously necessary. But if not in the past, future में OCF to EBITDA मेरा 70% के ऊपर होना चाहिए. FCF to PAT मेरा 90% के ऊपर होना चाहिए. If I am sure of these factors, then finalize in the sense I will dig deeper. ये तो preliminary हो गया.
So अब आपने इतना कुछ बोला, I figured that there are a lot of things that we also do.
Yeah.
I just passed off as vibe. So
That's why I think we should hop on who goes first, because then the other one has answers which are deeper.
actually adding on to how we do it, obviously it's the vibes, right?
Yeah.
But if I were to quantify that now, कहने को it has become second nature to us to deciding what passes as a story. But before we knew what we were doing, there were really good checks in place, and the obvious ones were, we don't want to pick a story that's purely sensational, because again, we want to be very intellectually honest with our audience. We want to give them something worth their time.
Yeah.
And more often than not, a lot of these news sites जहाँ से हम ये idea source करते हैं, it's very flimsy. There's literally nothing worth talking about, yet there are 1,000-word articles written by these news agencies, pure AI slop.
Yeah.
We have no reason to replicate that on our platform. And at the same time, sensationalization की आड़ में, more often than not, we don't want the biases to creep in. So if there is extensive coverage on a sector or on a theme, primarily driven by hype, which is clearly visible, we want to stay away from that. Again, coming back to the principles, where is there enough meat in it for us to justify choosing that story? So let's say there are 10 stories for today, 10 ideas that came out. We'll often discuss within ourselves purely from that point of view also, ki, is this really worth talking about? And that comes from the point, again, is this routine? Does this happen very often, or is this something new? Is this sensationalized? Is there enough meat? So there are a lot of these very micro things that happen at the back of our minds, that has almost become second nature to us. But these are the things we look very closely at before deciding.
Yeah.
And now, पहले क्या होता था? We used to argue a lot on deciding कि अच्छा ये वाली story, this is worth. But now we are all at the same wavelength, where by just looking at the headline, things, even if left unsaid, we know where this
So
story is
this
going.
collective wisdom.
We could call it wisdom.
Yeah.
We could call it an echo chamber of our own mistakes also. मतलब, this also is the reason why we also might get very tunnel vision into what we're doing.
Sure.
That's a very, very huge, क्या बोलते, a very huge
risk factor ही हो गया.
Yeah, it's a risk. It's a risk
Yeah.
that we have, and we acknowledge that. So yeah, these are a few things that we make sure. Also, we don't want to be very pushy and salesy as well. So there are times where there's a story worth covering, but then we also don't want people to think that we're being very pushy or salesy of what our business is, because in the end, it is a fact that there is no incentive of Zerodha to push out content to get people to transact or to do business. That's least of our worries. Again, because this is a privilege that we enjoy.
Sure.
And we want to be very clear about it. Even unintentionally, we do not want that happening. But oftentimes ऐसा होता है, let's say there's an IPO. हमने उस IPO के बारे में लिखा. We try to be as objective as possible. And obviously एक IPO में there's a lot to talk about. And we only have so much time to talk about. So there are obvious times कि some things get missed. Maybe most often than not unintentionally.
Yeah.
There are still people calling us out saying, you're peddling this IPO. Do you guys have a stake in it? Do you want us to
I mean,
buy?
yeah, if you're out in the public eye, that's bound to happen, right?
We want to be at a point where we are proactively preempting कि ऐसा ना हो. But at the same time, we rarely can truly understand how the masses think. And
Plus, I think
it's
if
out of our
people do
control.
that for one piece of yours, there is 9 other pieces, as you spoke in the beginning about volumes.
yeah.
It also covers up for it, saying कि यार नहीं, मतलब ठीक है,
Yeah.
एक में मुझे लगा होगा क्योंकि 9 तो.
But again, we don't want that happening. Even though we know it's out of our control, even though we know
It's
we're
bound
not
to
at
happen,
fault,
huh?
we're not at fault.
Yeah.
But we want to even remotely not want to be in a position where we're being called out, we're being biased. And honestly, in the end, the research that we're doing, the opinions that we're putting out, they are opinions, and opinions will be biased. Biased, even if they don't represent the bias of like Markets by Zerodha as a brand, but of the writer itself, because he comes.
So bias may not be the right word. The opinion may have a tilt which may not be favorable to everybody.
It will be highly opinionated.
Sure.
There are chances it can be opinionated, and we want to have that stance as well, because we are not really just a fact presenting We are
I mean, that's where the value addition comes from.
yeah.
Right?
We want to give our opinions.
Yeah.
We want to give our opinions, informed opinions. We might be wrong about it. We might be right about it. We don't know.
Yeah.
But we want to give that opinion. And I think people value that. People value that. And we're being called out as well when our opinion weren't as, grounded in facts. And we're more than open to, accepting the fact, okay, we were wrong here.
Yeah.
But that also is the beauty of how we do things, because when we have that two-way communication happening, it just gives us more joy, because in the end, हम अभी story लिख रहे हैं and views देखने में it's just a number on the screen. But when there's somebody who's commenting, who's taking out the time to write to us, it just gives us joy, because behind that screen there's a person who wrote that. Right? So that gives us more joy, even if it means we being called out.
Yeah.
So yeah, this went on a different tangent. But even though it's all the vibes, but behind vibes
there is parameters, of course.
Yeah, there's parameters.
Fair. Cool. So the meaty part now, the third bit, which is the process. You finalized an idea, or we finalized an idea. From that ideation, finalization to decision making, ki bhai, not decision making, execution. Let's call it execution. That in my case, it is us actually buying or selling. In your case, it's you finishing or uploading. Let's call it uploading. What's
so for us, that process again, it isn't structured because every story is unique, and we got to respect that uniqueness with the steps that we take. Maybe the trigger for that story would be a news article, but we won't limit ourselves to just that. We'll extensively use AI for our research, because AI is just like second Google to us. Pehle log Googling karte the, now we do AI deep research.
It's the same thing, but your method has changed.
Method has changed, right? So we rely heavily on that, purely for research perspective, because before we even start writing on something, we want to be sure that we understand it truly. And whatever it takes to understand that is the length and extent to which we will go. It could be, again, listening to podcasts maybe, or doing deep researches, talking to people at our own floor. Because again, more often than not, जो भी हम चीजें लिख रहे हैं, there's a resident expert in our company who knows about that thing very clearly. So our first instinct would be talk to them. Or there's somebody on the floor who knows someone जो इस field में expert है. So rather than us spending 3-4 hours, because we only have limited time, we want to deliver the story in a day. More often than not, we don't want to spend a lot of time building that context on ourselves. We rather rely on a third party, a trusted third party who we know are an expert at it, and just stand on their shoulders and build context on top of that. So be it connecting to these folks, or just reading up a lot on a lot of these things, and how do I put it? Making sure that during this whole process, we take in as many viewpoints as possible. Because अक्सर ऐसा होता है, even in AI is very leading. It leads you to a very narrow tunnel vision until you realize it.
Or until you introduce a new dimension and suddenly it's like, हाँ ये भी है तो अभी मैं ये भी बोलूँगा.
So it's very कोलू के बैल की तरह. Unless you yourself. So you have to make sure that you don't really get swayed away by just one aspect of it. Because if you're talking about even, let's say, a stock, right? You want to know all the goods, all the bads, all the uglies. And again, every story has angle from an economic point of view, from a political point of view, from a a geological point, social point of view. कुछ भी हो सकता है. You just want to make sure that you cover everything, or at least have that context before you start writing that story. And once we've built that context, then we start writing. Again, there are people who just write everything from scratch. How I do it is, once I've built all the context, I just dump it all on AI and then just ask it to give me a good first draft. Because I just literally use it as my laborer typewriter. कि ये मेरा idea है. This is what I'm going to talk about. You be my English writer. तू बस वो लिख के दे दे. And once that happens, I start having my editorial influence on that writing based on what I want to be emphasized, how I want it to be written. That. Again, in this whole process of researching and writing, we extensively use AI, knowing well the limitations of AI, just making sure that we are able to do justice to the story, and at the same time be very efficient also, because in the end we are running on a treadmill. हमें एक दिन में एक story देनी है. So and at the end of it, we have a story to put out. I guess, yeah, maybe now that you'll answer yours.
Yeah, then you'll get more points. No, for us, I think we don't have the constraint of time. And I think there are two ways to go about it. Some require very peripheral research. I'm taking a very broad level, commonsensical call. I'll explain. And one is where you do deep research, fully understand everything.
And also answer one more thing.
Huh.
Since you don't have a time constraint, doesn't that also lead you guys to a point of analysis paralysis? Because there's no limitation. You can end up researching on the same theme or a stock indefinitely and still not be convinced, because you'll never know everything about that topic. Where I come from is because even when we are writing a story, we know कि 1000 angle है, हम सिर्फ 10 cover कर पाएंगे. We'll accept the fact and we'll have that cut off कि boss अब नहीं हो रहा. We'll just fuck it. We'll just post it off.
No,
because we have that
investing.
It helps us because it naturally points us कि बस अब हो गया. But isn't that a limitation for you guys?
Not really, because and I believe that happens a lot in like other decisions that I make as well, which are not even investing. Where, for example, you do your thorough research, which is say, अगर 100 में से तुमने 60% कर लिया, तो you get to a certain opinion. Now, the more you read, you're just fine tuning that opinion. तुम्हारा majority direction तो आ गया है. उसके बाद अभी थोड़ा 1 degree इधर, 2 degree इधर, whatever, that can be figured out later, or that can be a function of time, or you just leave it there. You don't fixate too much on it, because the objective is not to figure out कि मेरा target price इसकी वजह से 158.34 आने वाला है. I don't care. मेरे हिसाब से 170 आना चाहिए, खत्म करो. So we don't. There is a pause to it. But yeah, sorry. So one step back. So one is a very commonsensical way of going about things, where I'll give you an example. इसमें, for example, चलो दाइवा में when I was tracking the media sector, for example, telecom sector. इसमें क्या है, media and telecom actually that was clubbed together. And I used to be pegged against, for every sector I track, I would be pegged against the MSCI respective sector का performance, and I have to basically outperform the benchmark at all times. In this, simply what to do, क्या थे options were Z Telefilms, Idea, Airtel, there were a bunch of other options, Dainik Bhaskar and Jagran and all these things, right? So print media basically, television, which was Sun TV and Z, and 2-3 telecom players. That was the index. I simply picked up Airtel to beat the entire index. One stock. खत्म. तो मुझे उसमें दिमाग नहीं लगाना है कि मैं 10 स्टॉक बैठ के पढूं, रिसर्च करूं, then I figure out. This is one of those things. If I have to, I will. I don't have any constraint of time. But अगर मेरा conclusion है कि मुझे index beat करना है relatively, and I can very well do that using Airtel, and I'm talking about the period between 2019 and 2021. तो मैं Airtel लेके बैठ गया. I did only 2 things. I long Airtel, I short Idea, and I outperformed that index massively by not even looking at the other companies.
You found a hack.
And there is a hack. There is always a hack. There is also another hack, which was InfoEdge was wrongly classified, for example, in the MSCI index as an infrastructure company. Internet का classification नहीं था तभी 2019 में what internet stocks. So infra analysts used to just buy InfoEdge and sit on it, because infra will go through its cycle में, तो InfoEdge पे पैसा कमाएगा. So if you look at that time period, whatever InfoEdge does, it will never fall, because nobody's selling. None of the FIIs like us are ever selling, because as an analyst, I want to outperform. I will hold on to InfoEdge, and I will automatically outperform the infrastructure index. So that was beautiful. Why do I bother? So that is one level कि तुम hacks ढूंढो या फिर पैसा कोई टेबल पे रख के गया है, मैं लेके जाऊंगा ना भाई, मैं क्यों एनालाइज करूं कि कितनी नोट्स है, सीरियल नंबर क्या है. Why do I do that? Take the money, go home. So that's one way of doing it. Commodities index also. I was just sitting on Asian Paints at that time, Pidilite and Asian Paints, before 2019 to 2021. Just sit on those stocks, because your metal, cement, everything will go through a cycle. I will catch 2 structural stories and I will beat the volatility. So my Sharpe ratio catching these 2 sectors is these 2 companies was much better than trying to research metals and cement and paints and whatever chemicals and all of that.
Okay.
So I would find structural stories in cyclical. So one way is to do that, be a little over smart or street smart with these things. The other way is obviously deep dive research, know everything, but with a limitation. But at the same time, so we would probably, for example, in cement, I've gone to a cement plant, an actual cement plant in Rajasthan for a company, spent 3 days there, understood the entire process. लाइमस्टोन कहाँ से आ रहा है, लाइमस्टोन का क्या हो रहा है, फिर वो क्लिंकर और ग्राइंडिंग प्लांट अलग है, क्यू अलग है. So speaking to 15 people in the company, 15 suppliers. Even while studying telecom, after a point, I think I've met all the battery suppliers, I've met all the companies, I've met the DOT, I've met the TRI, I've met everybody. So from that angle, you are sort of tapping into the ecosystem. If I'm tracking autos, I will speak to dealers, I will speak to customers, I will speak to part manufacturers, I will understand payment cycles, I will understand everything there is to understand. My objective at the end of it is to spend 75 to 80% of my time understanding the business. Because financials वगैरह पढ़ाई कर ली है, आता है मॉडल करना, your inputs in those things and your opinion or valuation are going to be based on the understanding of business. So that is primary. So I do not spend too much time on the model, etc. I will understand the business, and it's like you will research everything, but your writing time is very low. I will research everything, speak to 100 people, etc. But my time spent on making a model, etc. is very low. मैं खाचा बना रहता है, उसमें मैं सिर्फ नंबर डालने हैं, but that number, how I derive it, what my thinking is, what my opinion is, should be accurate.
Yeah.
So what I'm aiming for at the end of the day is what I think, what should be exactly reflected in my model, and the output of that should be reflected in my actions. So there is an alignment in thinking, studying, model, and finally weight or decision.
So yeah, one thing that I really liked how you drew a parallel was both of us end up spending more time doing the back end work than the actual form factor that everybody sees. For me, it's writing, but I end up doing just 20% writing.
Yeah.
Same आपके लिए वो एक रिपोर्ट होती होगी या वो फाइनेंशियल मॉडल होता होगा, but you only spend 10-20% of your time doing that. More of the time is actually spent researching and understanding, because then that defines the quality of the output for both of us. And I hadn't thought of it that way, but now that we were having this conversation, it was like aha moment for me. I just wanted to put it out and just word it out for others as well.
No, even like when it comes to like deciding on valuations for a stock, right? At the end of it, it's my opinion of what the valuation should be 2 years down the line. कि मैं target PE कितना है मेरा, target EV EBITDA कितना है. For that, again, it's a function of understanding the business, understanding competitors, understanding historically how the market has given what multiple at what point in time, how sensitive it is, etc., etc. So I think we're looking at valuations also from multiple angles, compared to itself, compared to peers, compared to global peers, India versus somebody else. Look at it from stress situation, good situation, bad situation, selling situation, liquidity wise अगर differences है तो क्या होता है. Then finally come to a number saying कि यार मेरे को लगता है इसका pegging या तो absolute basis पे होगा, या फिर मैं peg पे करूँगा, या फिर मैं competitors पे premium discount दूंगा, या whatever. I think that decision making is barely any time because you've spent so much time researching. So my model at the end of the day, whatever my APS is, my P, whatever I'm giving, that is barely 10-20% of the time. Initially, as to मतलब start of the career, you're like मैं modeling करता हूँ, whatever 24 घंटे तुम लगे हुए हो, fine. मॉडल ऐसे एकदम परफेक्ट कर रहे हो, सारे शेड्यूल्स आ गए उसमें ये वो, बट आई थिंक ओवर टाइम यू जस्ट टेंड टू allocate your time differently.
I think I'll add on to how this is very similar to what we do, and I guess you'll agree as well, because during the research you end up going to those rabbit holes which end up defining the final outcome for you. You wouldn't have thought that maybe this company should be valued not basis PEG P, but as a premium or a discount to a competitor. But you came to that decision because of the process that you followed and the research that you did. Same is the case with us, because we don't know what the end outcome looks like, but we know hopefully while we're doing all this research, we'll come to a point. And I totally agree with you, because when I started writing first, I actually started writing first, which was stupid. Even though that's the end outcome, you never start writing first. As a writer, you start researching first, which sounds very...
We took it too literally.
And I think that parallel also is very prominent because writing eventually happens
Yeah.
once you've, because then writing just happens incidentally.
Yeah.
You don't realize it, it just happens.
Yeah.
Because if I were asked to write a 1800 word article on something, and if I don't know anything about writing, I'd be caught off guard कि भाई इतना ज़्यादा कैसे लिखूंगा. Up until you realize that if you start researching, doing all of that, things eventually start falling into place.
Yeah.
And by the time you're done with the process, the outcome is the beautiful piece of content that you've written on. But in your case,
Yeah. The beautiful investment we've made. No, but like I realized that on the sell side. So before being on the buy side, I was also working on the sell side for 5 years. That's where a majority of my experience is. And I'd initiated coverage in Motilal Oswal on the staffing industry when Teamlease and Questcop ke IPOs aaye the. And I'd written a 100-page report. So people had asked me questions like, "Kaise likha bhai 100 page ka report?" I was like, that's not the point. I would have researched as much. Writing it barely took time because whatever I was researching, I was just writing, and then it was structuring. So the 100 pages writing wasn't the big deal. The research that went behind it was the big deal.
I think you can never back solve it. Matlab, looking at the writing, you can never know where it started from. But if you start from somewhere, you'll eventually realize, okay, this is the natural outcome that happened.
Yeah.
Because again, even I would get कि भाई 80 पेज की रिपोर्ट कोई कैसे लिख सकता है.
Yeah.
But only you realize कि if you don't start from there, but from the other end.
Yeah.
I think, wow.
Yeah. So anyway, so final bit. Once you've produced your output, come to a decision. What's next? How do you close the loop?
We close the loop by finalizing the script. Again, fine tuning. Thoda language.
There would be an editor for language checks and stuff.
Yeah. It's usually us editing each other pieces as only.
Okay.
And I guess that's how it works in investment as well. Everyone bouncing off, critiquing their stories. Usually feedback time for us is very less because again we have to deliver the story in a day. So we make sure कि हम basic hygiene checks कर लें. And then we just push it out. And once we've pushed it out, what matters is monitoring. Monitoring not just in terms of views. हम सिर्फ views नहीं देख रहे. Obviously that is one thing that we also look at कि okay भाई ये story अच्छा कर रही है. It could be for any reason. Maybe people just like the thumbnail. Maybe it's just the title. Maybe the story itself is good. Maybe it's just the topic that was good. हमारी story में कुछ दम नहीं था. So we really don't know, which is why we won't really attach our success failure metric to that. But we still monitor it to know, okay, on a long enough period, that does give us an idea कि are we going in the right direction. And obviously, much more importantly, it's the comments, which I guess in your case would be feedback. Now that feedback comes because we publish across Substack, Twitter, YouTube. We have comments coming in from everywhere. Most of the times comments are positive, and most of the times they're also noise where people are just projecting their biases on the piece. We acknowledge that, try replying most of them. We want to reply to all of them because if they've taken out time to write to us, it's unfair on their part. If we don't respect their time. So we reply to every comment out there. And also those comments either help us refine the story that we did, find mistakes in our own writing and editing, and also become a source of new idea for us for future stories that we write. So I remember I did a story on REITs. I wanted to be as comprehensive as possible, but again, due to the paucity of time, there's only so much I could cover. There was a comment on that talking about how I've not talked about it acting as a quasi-equity instrument. Which was a very obvious thing that I completely missed because I was clouded by the research that I was doing at that time. I was like, fuck it, this is a very important thing. Next time I write a story on REITs, I'll obviously link it back to the story that I wrote, but focus more on this maybe next time. So those comments are actually much more helpful in, again, us quenching our thirst for curiosity, because now we're actually getting that feedback. Pehle it was just very internal, and there are times when internally we might get that tunnel vision and wo ek echo chamber ban jata hai. We want to break away from that. Comments like these, which are really insightful, irrespective of them being critical or not, really help us do that, and they are very rewarding to us. So in the last step, when we're monitoring all of this, the feedback that we get outside, even internally, we're fortunate कि जो internal Zerodha wale folks हैं, even Nitin, they also read our things that we do very religiously. So they are not at all hesitant in critiquing it at any point. And that just really makes us feel good about it, because in the end, we're writing for people to read, and if people are reading and they're commenting and they're giving us feedback, that's a really good, that's a really good feeling to have. And I guess that's where the whole loop closes up until next day when the whole process starts again.
Very short cycle.
Very short cycle. Very short cycle.
Yeah. For us, it's not a short cycle, unfortunately, because even if you've scrapped an idea in the discovery phase, somewhere you know that abhi nahi to baad mein. Because things are so dynamic. And that's where I think analysts come of use, because they have sectors and they'll keep a track of it, because fund managers can't possibly be doing that all the time. But what also ends up happening from a decision making perspective, before even we get there, is that you need to decide on two things. One, are you buying it? Are you selling it? If you already have it, let's focus on buying first. Or you're doing nothing about it, you're parking it aside. All of those decisions are dependent on the amount of upside you're seeing, uh, and how much conviction you have on that upside. So I may think that there is 100% upside, but my conviction on it may be lower. I have to not only decide what I'm doing with it, but how much I'm doing with it. So to what extent I'm betting on it. So I have to also prepare a strategy in terms of, यार अभी stock तो बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है, लेकिन auto sector नीचे है. So am I gonna double down on it right now, or just put right now 1% weight and increase on further opportunities? So I have to also time it. So I think the decision making is not only buying or selling, which is very nuanced and very surface level, which most people think. It is dependent on a lot more factors: industry, mood of the market, type of market, because sometimes it's a value market, sometimes it's a growth market, sometimes it's a momentum market, and that keeps changing. My own strategy, my own macro thinking, my own conviction, blah blah, which all ultimately decides how much weight to put on a certain stock. Because even if I have a high conviction idea, but the sector weight itself I want to limit, then again there is a problem. I also have to judge in taking how much weight. The amount of weight I'm taking here is the amount of weight I'm not taking somewhere else. So this better be damn worth that not taking weight. So there's a lot of factors going in. So I don't think there is a very simple model to say isme 5%, isme 10%. It's not that arbitrary. I think it's a very judgment call. It's very qualitative. There is a model somewhere in the back of my head, but I possibly can't put it in an Excel, because that model also keeps changing all the time. So I think decision making comes there in terms of buying fresh, and even maintaining and managing, because strategies, etc., keep changing all the time. So major decisions to take are buy, hold, sell, how much, when. That's always sort of going about. But the one thing I think, again, a parallel to draw is that you're looking for very honest feedback from the market. If it's not doing
Is
well,
stock price a good feedback factor?
sure. I mean, the price will make you question why, and you got to be honest in terms of answering the whys, because it all comes down to, and here is where emotionally detaching from the fact that मेरा decision है, मैं कैसे गलत जा सकता हूँ, या फिर market गलत है, मैं सही हूँ. That also happens where market गलत है, तुम सही हो, but then your conviction comes into play. So I think a lot of that is a very, very emotional game. I think this part that we're talking about, all earlier parts are very cognitive. This part is very emotional. It requires you to be very objective. It requires to be very clear about your thoughts and emotions. Fears aside, greed aside, be very, very objective.
I guess हमारी case में, since there's not money at stake, the stakes are really low. So even if we end up doing mistakes, it's easier for us to accept that mistake, which is why I think we don't suffer a lot from that emotional psychological angle as much as you guys would do, because there's money at stake and it's your own word at line.
But I'll tell you what, sorry, but by just saying that, there is a fear that can creep into a fund manager's head. यार 70,000 करोड़ है, कैसे यार, मतलब एक दिन में 1,000 करोड़ ऊपर नीचे जा रहा है भाई. So you're also not sleeping well the first few days, because you're like, I just lost 1,500 crores, I just lost 2,000 crores. The moment you detach yourself from that quantum and look at it again, emotional management, you'll be able to objectively look at it and say, it's okay, was 2,000 crores down, it is an opportunity, extra cash pada hua hai, dalo. That decision will not come out of fear. So I always think that a fund manager makes it when there is no difference in emotion, whether he is managing 600 crore or 60,000 crore. The moment you see that your decision making is not affected by that quantum, you're a good fund manager with stable emotions.
So you think you'd be a good fund manager if you thought like a content writer with no emotions attached?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
maybe
We should swap jobs.
I'm good. I'm good. I'm very happy with mine. No reason to take that. No reason to take that burden. Yeah. Good
But
for
yeah,
them.
on that note, I think this was a fun conversation. Parallels between two things that we'd sort of not thought there would be too many parallels in. But I think there's a lot in common between what we do. So yeah, great having Kashish on board.
Just one more thing.
Yeah.
Just one again. The last thing that I'd reiterate that I started with was that irrespective of what kind of a research guy you are,
Yeah.
I think again it is largely driven by how interested and curious you are about the
sure.
thing that you're researching on, right?
Yeah.
Because if you aren't curious enough, you won't look at all these angles as a stock analyst. Even though there's money at stake, you just can't. And curious to the point where you are asking a why to every possible thing, because then it's a very uncomfortable question to ask, because then it leads you to an unknown territory that you are alone to figure out. And a lot of people are not interested or capable, or I don't know the right word, but they don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what differentiates a good research guy and a bad research guy. I don't know whether they're a good or bad research guy. I think they're just good or bad questions to ask.
Yeah.
And if you just ask enough questions over and over again, I think there's nobody stopping you from being good at that research, be it in form of an equity research analyst or a content writer. So I think that should be how I'd like to close this note.
No, for sure. Totally agreed. Curiosity is, I think, the prime of it. Because inherently, and I'll go back to the starting point of saying that so many people want research jobs and we get 300 applications. How many of them are curious? So in the process, usually what I want to see is the person curious or not? You may be from an engineering background. I don't care as long as you're curious. So I think that's a common point.
And something that can't be learnt, but only...
It's in you.
Yeah.
So either you're a research analyst or you're not.
Yeah.
The title won't make you one. And if it makes you one, you won't be good at it. So,
Yeah.
cool. So on that note, thank you very much for watching. It was great having Kashish here as usual. Great, very insightful. And keep watching. Subscribe, like, do the whatever. And see you next time.
Disclaimer. This content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.